June 1950. Hundreds of North Korean tanks storm across the 38th parallel in a surprise attack against South Korea.
The North Koreans were totally vicious, just kept on a-coming.
In a bid to stem the invasion, a small, ill-equipped U.S. force is quickly thrown into the fight.
It's like Custer's last stand, and you gotta fight like hell to get out there.
It was just the beginning of what would become one of the most vicious conflicts of the 20th century.
All of a sudden, all hell broke loose.
They were squirming all over. We was killing North Koreans left and right. This is the Battle for Korea, one of history's forgotten tank battles.
I can remember how... Oh hell, this is it.
Panmunjom, Korea. This small village is situated on the 38th parallel, the de facto border that bisects the Korean Peninsula. It's a place of hair-trigger tension when North and South Korean soldiers stand face to face, and where one wrong move could reignite a war that started more than 60 years ago. The invasion. June 25, 1950. 120,000 North Korean soldiers led by masses of Soviet-made tanks swarm across the border into South Korea. Since the end of the Second World War, Korea has been a nation divided, with a U.S.-backed republic controlling the South, while communists supported by the Soviet Union rule in the North. Determined to see the two Koreas united into a single communist state, the Soviet Union has provided the North Koreans with military advisors, training, and most importantly, weapons. For the invasion, North Korea has amassed more than 1,100 heavy guns, 120,000 troops, and 250 T-34 tanks, easily outnumbering the South Koreans, who were able to field less than 230 heavy guns, 68,000 troops, and no tanks.
The South Korean army was relatively untrained for conventional warfare, sort of not well armed to fight an artillery and tank-heavy North Korean army.
The North Korean plan is to punch through South Korea's weak border defenses, seize the capital of Seoul, and rush south. The invaders are relying on surprise, overwhelming force, and speed.
The basic concept was for the North Koreans to plow right through the infantry and then create a mess behind the lines. In a sense, I suppose you called mini blitzkriegs.
The mini blitzkrieg works. North Korean tanks and infantry quickly overwhelm South Korea's defenses along the 38th. By June 28th, they're in Seoul, and they seem unstoppable. The United Nations intervenes, and the U.S. immediately deploys a few hundred soldiers from their garrison in nearby Japan. Their mission? Halt the North Koreans and buy time for reinforcements to arrive. On July 5th, the lightly armed GIs of Task Force Smith take up defensive positions near Osan, directly in the path of the advancing North Koreans.
I think most of the GIs who deployed really believed that because this was an Asian army, that somehow it was inferior. Well, they found out, of course, that the North Koreans were pretty tough.
The battle.
We got there about 5 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock they hit us. So we men start just trying to hold a hill. They had trucks in the back of the tanks all over troops. Somebody said that was 2 divisions behind the tanks, but we didn't know of. We were outnumbered. We're 406 guys trying to fight 2 divisions and all them tanks.
North Korea's main battle tank is the Soviet T-34-85. Outfitted with 45 millimeters of sloped frontal armor and armed with an 85 millimeter main cannon, the T-34-85 is considered by many to be the greatest tank of the Second World War.
First guy, run down the hill, open a hatch, threw a grenade in, the first tank blew up. The kind of sit on the hatch so they said and couldn't jump out. And it blew up. So another guy kept hitting with the old bazooka. We thought that bazooka would knock that out, but it didn't. It looked like if we had a tennis ball, that's how it bounced off. This one guy put 20 in one tank. Didn't knock it out. Circle around and it's like Custer's last stand, and you gotta fight like hell to get out of there. Taking on a hill would be like that, just like firing artillery. I lost a lot of my buddies. Some were digging down in the front there. I lost a lot of them. I can still see their faces sometime. We're fighting to stay alive, and it just didn't work. We're pulling rear guard. We start trying, pick a position to hold them back because we got nothing lined up. They had a tunnel, and I see these fusiliers drilling holes and putting dynamite all over the place. Then they had the plunger, We're trying to get him right inside so that it blocked the tunnel, and then when it blows, all that ammo would be blown all over the place. But the sergeant, he got kind of nervous. He said, "Just at blow now and get out of here." The old man says, "Let's start moving back, or we'll all get cut off." They were coming like, say, 20 to 1.
After holding the line for 7 desperate hours, the American GIs are forced into a fighting retreat, and by the next day, half of the men of Task Force Smith are killed, wounded, or captured. The North Koreans continue their advance, and U.S. commanders scramble. The M-24 to get reinforcements into the battle. Soon, thousands more American troops arrive, including an understrength battalion of light M-24 reconnaissance tanks. The M-24 is designed more for speed than for armored battle. Its hull is equipped with only 25 millimeters of armor, and its main cannon is a low-velocity 75 millimeter gun, not designed to take on heavier tanks like the T-34. But despite their shortcomings, the M-24s rushed to meet the advancing North Korean tanks.
Retaking this ground, and we were at the top of a hill getting ready to go down, and out in the valley there was 2 T-34s. The Air Force was coming in shooting rockets at them. They hit the first one, set it on fire. There was 2 jets, and they took off, and I think they had opened up on the other one, and maybe they thought to hit him because he quit moving. But after they left, the first started moving. He was on fire. The tank commander said he ain't moving on his own, and he started looking, and he says the second one is pushing him out the road. He's pushing right out the road. The second was coming rolling up. The tank commander gave a range 200 yards, where you take and you get your weapon out at 200 yards and you get that tank when you saw him in the crosshairs, and you'd fire. The first shot hit right over where the driver, he had his hatch up, and I hit right above it, and it just bounced off like I was shooting an elephant with a BB gun. And the tank commander says, "Fire at will." Second shot hit him, third shot hit him. Of course, all 3 just bounced off. The people in that tank must have been laughing at me. The 85 millimeter, you better believe it looked like a telephone pole compared to ours. I can remember howling, "Oh hell, this is it," I said. That's all I got out. And we were already hit. We were very lucky that he hit where he hit, because that was the thickest part of the tank, the shield, only 75 millimeter. If it had hit below the shield, those 75s he would have penetrated without a doubt, and we'd all been killed. It wasn't too long until every tank we had was wiped out in our company.
By the end of July, the North Koreans have pushed over 400 kilometers south and have the American and South Koreans bottled up in a defensive perimeter around the seaport of Pusan, and are on the brink of defeat. The situation is desperate, and U.S. commanders scramble to muster more troops and equipment, especially tanks.
We finally arrived there, and I think just in time to be able to stop the North Koreans. We had just enough tanks to be able to let them think that we had tanks all over the front, but it wasn't that way. Our M4A3E8s, we could go 30 miles an hour from one position to another.
The EZ-8 Sherman is the main battle tank of U.S. forces in the Korean theater. It made its debut during the Second World War, but what sets it apart from earlier Sherman models is its high-velocity 76 millimeter gun, adding a powerful punch to this quick and agile tank.
And we were on the east side of the Nakdong River, the enemy being on the other side of that river. Our 2nd Battalion had a mission to move on up to high ground on the left of the road. In my tank section, we moved to the right, facing the river, searching for enemy movement out there. We couldn't see anything. We were just there watchful, see what would develop. And something did develop. To my left front, And across the road where I believe it was F Company moving up on that hill, an enemy tank opened fire on them. I could see the rounds were hitting, causing some casualties. So I immediately checked to see where that tank was firing from, and I was able to locate it by the blast of its gun, and that we were in defilade position behind this hill, and we moved on up and engaged that tank, then pulled back and go up and fire. My primary mission was to draw the fire to me and keep that tank from firing at those fellows that were out there in the open. Then that tank opened fire on me, and we exchanged rounds. This one particular one that went right over us, we almost got killed at the time. In any case, I was glad that the enemy tank had ceased firing, evidently have caused some damage on him. So I did my job before we had jet fighters to come in and drop napalm. Everything was quiet after that.
Although UN forces are outnumbered, North Korea's attempts to breach the Pusan Perimeter fails. Daytime strikes by U.S. warplanes cause chaos, and the North Koreans begin operating at night when U.S. tanks are vulnerable to attack. The night attack.
I knew we were going to have a night attack. The enemy had already crossed the river onto our side, and if they were there that afternoon, they were going to hit us at night. Tanks at night, if you don't watch what you're doing, you can lose your tank in no time at all. If they don't know where you are at night, the enemy is going to want to draw your fire so that they can have a better idea of where you fired from, because then their land companies, they can move in on your tank. And that's the reason we don't fire at night unless we absolutely have to. So we had an outpost up there. The outpost had set up booby traps. When that is set off, there has to be somebody out there. So when I heard that booby trap explosion, I am right away looking, and then I see movement coming, and I see them coming. They open fire. One of the rounds had hit my front slope. All of a sudden, this huge explosion on my face, and it knocked me out. That's when I realized we've got a direct hit on our tank. I had a headache for a long time. So then I instructed my other tank commander. I said, when I open fire, you open fire, and then I'll be aiming to the right, you aiming to the left, and then we give them, the crossfire. So we're going to have people running in away from where those tracers are going, and same way over here.
So when they do that, then we catch them, and that's the idea. Right after we got through firing, all we could hear was the enemy wounded out there. Anyway, we won that night. By early August, the steam is gone out of the North Korean attack. After 6 weeks of fighting, they've lost almost 30% of their initial strength. And every day, the UN forces hold the Pusan Perimeter. They get stronger as reinforcements pour into the port city. The North Koreans must act quickly. They prepare to throw everything they have left into one last armored assault, hoping to take Pusan and complete their invasion of Korea. The Last Offensive. July 1950. After a week of desperate fighting, the outnumbered and outgunned United Nations forces managed to keep their foothold on the Korean Peninsula, buying time for the arrival of more men, ammunition, and tanks. And while UN forces grow stronger, the North Koreans are suffering significant losses, and by August, their once mighty invasion force has lost most of its punch. With time quickly running out, the North Koreans mount one last offensive, a two-pronged armored assault aimed at penetrating the UN line at Masan and across the Nakdong River near the city of Daegu. That's when we saw our first action, was when the T-34 is trying to come across the Nakdong and push to Pusan Perimeter. But they never progressed against the M26s. We would camouflage, they didn't know we was up there, and a platoon leader told us, "Don't fire until I give the word." He assigned each of our tank a tank to fire at. We knew the range, we had everything down pat, and then all of a sudden, he said fire. The M26 Pershing is designed for tank-to-tank combat. Its hull is protected by 76 millimeters of armor and armed with a 90 millimeter main cannon, more than powerful enough to take on a T-34. We had an armor-piercing cap, and the muzzle velocity was 4,850 feet per second. And when that round hit that tank, it just lifted the turret right off of it. It was something. And it did, boom, and it just breaks that cast metal up. I think that they were shocked. They never fire a round at us. They was trying to get away. Them tanks flew apart all around them. We fired at them and knocked out 4 more. We had no fear of them after a while. We didn't fear their T-34s. North Korea's last big push fizzles, and UN forces go on the offensive. The plan? U.S. Marines will land at Incheon and advance east, while UN forces break out of the Pusan Perimeter and push north. The aim is to cut off and destroy the retreating North Korean army. We ran into retreating T-34 tanks. One popped out of a side road or out of a rice paddy, within 1,000 yards. Fire, move, because you didn't want to stay in one spot. Rounds are going over us, around us, and they shouldn't have missed, but they did. We had a round that glanced off the turret, but it hit at a glancing blow, so it didn't then explode. It's kind of hard to hit with the M4 a moving target. So we war-sighted, open the breech and just look down the barrel of the gun, if you're that close, and then put a round in and fire. For the gunner to put one right down the muzzle of the T-34. Peeled it back like a banana. They must have had a round in the chamber, because the turret just erupted, which was spectacular. They said the 34 was a good tank back during the Second World War, but the Russians knew how to use their tanks. The North Koreans didn't know how to use them. They were not tank people, so we didn't have too much problem with the tanks. Now the infantry, oh boy, they raised hellcats. I mean, they could sneak up on you where they would swarm over your tanks and throw grenades down into your engine compartment. The rear tank, he's always with his turret backwards covering our back. The second guy, he was to the left. Third guy was to the right. Front guy was to the front. And that's where you covered each other. Yeah, if you get a bunch of North Koreans swarming on the tanks, you just fire on them and start shooting them up. The North Koreans just didn't seem to give a rip when he was coming at you. They were like the Japanese when they had bonsai charge. In one skirmish, I remember that the North Koreans just crawling all over our tanks. Well, the gunner, he just swung the turret around, knocked them all off. And the guys in front of us seen what was going on, so they just turned their turret back towards us, started shooting them off. They were swarming all over us. We was killing North Koreans left and right. I can remember a couple times that we get into a firefight and they were shooting their small arms at us. Well, it was just like somebody throwing popcorn against the side of a tin can. Despite desperate resistance from the retreating North Koreans, MacArthur's forces advanced steadily, and by October they'd driven the North Koreans back across the 38th parallel. American soldiers begin talking about being home for Christmas, but they were about to learn the Korean War is far from over. General MacArthur said, "Take it all the way. Take it all the way." October 10th, 1950. 4 weeks after fighting their way out of the Pusan Perimeter, United Nations forces push north, forcing the tattered North Korean army back across the 38th parallel. We were under the impression that everything was over with, we'd be home for Christmas, and General MacArthur decided different. What they didn't think that we was going to cross the 38th parallel, and then General MacArthur said, "Take it all the way." That 70th Tank Battalion Big Company was the first unit to enter Pyongyang, the North Korean capital, and they had tanks dug in their streets. So what we did, we skirted the city and we came in from the north, and they couldn't try reverse their guns around to fire at us, as they dug them in. And before they could get them out and turn them around, we'd done liked them out. By mid-October, U.S. forces occupy Pyongyang, but the war's still not over. General MacArthur, determined to pursue and destroy the entire Communist army, sends infantry and tanks deep into the mountainous North Korean interior. By the last week of November, they approach the Yalu River, the border between North Korea and Communist China. The night of the 25th of November, we went further north into the Chongchon River Valley. What happened that night, we always went into a circle, just like you see a cowboy movie, where you have covered wagons in a circle, and then the Indians were taken. I told my tank crew, "You ought to go ahead and go to sleep." I said, "I'll take the first watch." By that time, it was 9 o'clock in the evening. I looked down the valley and I could see 2 or 3 small bonfires. Nothing moving, everything was quiet. And I'm just sitting there, and then I start thinking about, going home for Christmas. What it's going to be, we're going to be happy and all. And all of a sudden, all hell broke loose. The A Company got the worst there. There was plunging fire coming out, down from that high ground. And I said, "Oh God Almighty, crank it up, we're going to turn the tank around." Instinctively, you know that once they stopped, then we would get hit from this side with the same volume of fire. And that's what you call the double envelopment maneuver. Well, I was ready for him. I'm checking the area, and sure enough, I saw this enemy coming up from the river. And when they did, we were already prepared to engage them, because they had prepared 580 delaying 76mm rounds. We were ready to fire. Then I started to stop the enemy, and, "Stop, who goes there?" And they still didn't stop. And I said, "Fire." He fired, the round hit like this, and bounced and exploded right over these guys' heads. Knocked them all out. Got them all. And as soon as it began to get daylight, one individual came running up to my tank and said, "Sergeant Reyna, can I go out there and check for souvenirs?" I said, "No, there's bound to be some live enemy troops out there." He went anyway. He went no further than, heck, I'd say 35 yards out, and turned around and he ran just as fast as he could back to me. He said, "Sergeant Reyna, there's Chinese out there." What Sergeant Reyna has just encountered is the beginning of a massive Chinese offensive, a 300,000 men strong invasion force intent on driving UN forces out of Korea. The Chinese attack. After a 7-week-long advance through North Korea, UN forces reached the Yalu River on the Chinese border. The North Korean army seems beaten at last, but on the night of November 25th, the Americans and South Koreans come under attack. But this time it's not the North Koreans, but the Chinese. Threatened by the American advance towards their border, the People's Republic of China launches an invasion force 300,000 strong to attack UN positions. The Chinese have really figured out, because they didn't have much artillery and no air support to speak of, that they were going to fight us in an entirely different way. To get in the rear areas, disrupt the artillery infantry teams, and to take tanks out of the combat equation. It's like a foot blitzkrieg. When they were given a mission, the Chinese, they did not divert from that mission. They kept on coming no matter how many got killed. It's fearful, because they had no respect for their life. Why would they respect your life? US and South Korean forces are shocked by the magnitude and ferocity of the Chinese attack, and all along the front, UN forces are easily overwhelmed. We looked at the mountain path where we came up 3 days before that, and they mined the road over there. There was no way down except down the side of this mountain. I mean, it was a steep mountain. Sergeant Mann said, "If we stay up here, we'll get killed, and we're not going to get killed, we're going to get out of here." Old Sergeant Mann says, "Billy, what do you think?" And I says, "Well, let's try her. We can only wind up at the bottom." Down the side of that mountain, it had gravel, stones, shale, like going down the side of a gravel pit. We slid probably halfway down the dumb thing, with tracks locked. We slid quite a ways, let's say maybe 500 yards, down that steep mountain of that mountain pass. But Billy kept her right straight downhill. We got down to the bottom, down into the valley. There was 3 of us tanks got out of there at that time. The rest of them was still up there. And that's when the 2nd Division just got about annihilated. It was a well-set-up ambush, very well set up. And we got caught in Kunuri, what they call the Gauntlet. We didn't realize how many Chinese were in North Korea at the time, and then they just started coming and coming. They caught all the 17 miles, and they murdered, and I mean they just caught heck. We get all this equipment trying to come down out of Kunuri Pass. Well, the Chinese had it covered on both sides of that gauntlet, and it was just nothing but blowing up vehicles all over the road. We lost probably 3,800 men, I guess. What they told us, I don't know. Wounded, killed, and prisoners. Why, it was just a big mess. It was like a junkyard. But it was a scary experience. In just a few days, the Chinese wipe out almost half of the 2nd Infantry Division. It's the same grim story all along the front. And by November 28th, UN forces are in full retreat.
We kept withdrawing. We went back to the south of the South Korean capital, back south of Seoul. And you know, the ground that you fight for and that people died for, and you start withdrawing. Now that really gets to your heart. Believe me, it does. The Korean War, November 25, 1950. A Chinese army of 300,000 crosses the Yalu River into North Korea. The Korean War, which UN forces thought they were winning, takes a lethal new turn. In just 3 days, UN forces are in full retreat. By December 15th, the Chinese have pushed them back across the 38th parallel. We kept withdrawing and withdrawing. We went back to the south of the South Korean capital, back south of Seoul. And we reorganized and started to push back north. We got up there just north of Seoul, and it was kind of raining, drizzling, and a miserable day, and we went up on this mountain. We're going across. That night, fog set in, and like the old saying is, it was thick enough you could cut it with a knife. I've never saw fog that heavy in my life. And we heard these enemy tanks, and we knew they was moving. They got to be on the road, and we knew that. But we couldn't distinguish where the road was at. And we waited and listened. Well, they pulled my tank right up where the road dips over and goes down the other side of the mountain. We're sitting there, and I couldn't see nothing. Nobody could. And the first thing we know, this tank hit us. Boom. And we never saw that tank until it hit us. Absolutely, it hit us. And then he fired the gun. And that upset everything inside the tank. We could put our gun over, but we couldn't put it on the tank because it had hit the side of the tank. And he couldn't get his gun over to knock us out. What I was afraid he'd do, he'd back up and jerk loose and then blow us away. It would have been like a quick draw, whoever got the round there first. Yeah, we fired the machine guns. This went on for a while, and we had to get somebody to come over and go around where they could get a shot inside the tank. We turned our headlights on, and in the mist and the headlights, he said he still couldn't really see the tank, but he could see what he thought was the tank. When he fired, it was the tank. For the next 8 months, the battlefront shifts back and forth across the 38th parallel, with UN forces gaining ground only to lose it to Chinese and North Korean counterattacks. By the summer of 1951, a year after it began, with fast, mobile tank battles, the Korean War grinds down into a bloody stalemate. Tanks, so important in the early fighting, are now used mainly as mobile artillery. In July 1953, both sides sign a ceasefire and take up heavily armed positions along the 38th parallel. And now this heavily occupied border remains a tinderbox. More than 1.5 million troops, over 15,000 artillery pieces, and 6,000 tanks are poised on both sides, ready to reignite the decades-old conflict. There is no question that if this should happen, tanks will once again play a critical role on the Korean battlefield. Armor is the combat arm of decision. They're decisive, fast, and they carry a war. The introduction of U.S. armor onto the Korean battlefield helped to turn the tide of war against the North Koreans, but these battles proved costly for both sides. In just the first 6 months of the war, over 60,000 North Koreans are killed or wounded, and U.S. forces suffer more than 25,000 casualties. It was an experience that a young kid should never have to go through. There's a lot of guys that died there, a lot of guys that were taken prisoner there. I did the best of my ability and tried to stay alive. I can say, a lot of what you go through, you try to forget it, but it's hard to forget a lot of it. You just live with it. That's all you can do.